Hello. So now we'll be looking at the gross anatomy of the lower limbs. And of course, we have some objectives lined up that we seek to achieve in the course of this lecture. And those objectives are at the end of this lecture, we should be able to describe the joints, the bones, the muscular compartments of the lower limbs. We should be able to describe and identify the blood vessels, that's the blood supply to the lower limb and all that. We're supposed to also be able to describe the major nerves, identify, describe, and of course, study the major nerves of the lower limbs. And of course, not leaving out the clinical importance, clinical correlations, and functional anatomy. There are various conditions that affect every aspect of the body, every part of the body. And those aspects, we know normally when we talk about the structural integrity of any part of the body, we talked about in our previous lecture, we talked about the upper limb. Now, looking at the lower limb, we talked about some of the clinical conditions. Now, this part of the body has this, it has this, it has this. We've been able to identify the bones, the joint, the muscles, the blood supply, arterial supply, venous drainage, lymphatic nodes, and all that, lymphatic drainage, everything all together. But at the same time, in as much as this body functions based on, of course, divine design, there are still some conditions that affect this part of the body. And those other conditions are what we call the clinical correlations that actually affect this part of the body. All right, so let's move on to the overview of the upper limb or the lower limb, pardon me. Now we'll be looking at the regions of the lower limb. And the regions of the lower limb, we have the thigh, we have the hip, of course, we have the hip, we have the thigh, we have the leg, and we have the foot. We have the hip, we have the thigh, we have the leg, and we have the foot. That's from the top to the bottom. We'll be going into more details in that in a minute. Okay, so we're looking at the functions of the lower limb. Now, what are the functions of the lower limb? I know most of the time people may seem like, okay, well, the lower limb is we use it to walk, but it's not just that. It's not just about walking. It's not just about standing. It is more complex than that. There are many features that are designed, that actually are designed in the lower extremities that serves more function than just us standing and walking. Okay, so functions, of course, with basic functions, actually, we have support, we have locomotion, we have balance, and of course, moving on. So we talked about the regions, like I mentioned, the regions of the upper limb earlier. So we'll be looking first at the pelvic girdle. The pelvic girdle is, we can also call the pelvic girdle the hip region. Okay, these are like, it actually forms the hip region entirely. We said we'll be discussing from the top to the bottom. So the pelvic girdle, and the components of the pelvic girdle, we have the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. The ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. And we have the joints that exist in the pelvic girdle. We have the sacroiliac joint and the pubic symphysis. We have the sacroiliac joint and the pubic symphysis. Now we have diagrams here that would actually help us see clearly the names of these bones and of course the joints that are involved in the pelvic girdle. Okay, and of course we also have the acetabulum, and of course that's where we have the acetabulum, and that's what forms, of course, the point of articulation where the head of the femur meets with the acetabulum, which gives us the acetabulo-femoral joint. It's actually a very, very important joint. Well, the diagram would actually give a clearer picture on that. So as we move on, we would get to discuss that better. Okay, so now we're looking at the bones of the lower limb. We're looking at the bones of the lower limb. So the bones of the lower limb, of course, I believe we've actually heard this in our common biology, and of course, sometimes even scrolling on social media, we've seen some documentaries on the human body and all that. And we've been able to, I believe rather, that from the time we've actually spent surfing the net, sometimes doing some basic research, we should be able to identify like some very, I would say, unique bones in the body, some bones that stand out. Take, for example, the femur. Now, the femur is known as the largest bone in the body. Okay, the femur is known as the largest bone in the body. So we'll be looking at the bones of the lower limb. Okay, so we're looking at, first of all, the femur, and then we have the tibia and the fibula. Now, when we come down here, like down to the leg, right? When we come down to the leg, now the femur, of course, we have the hip region, like I said, we have the pectoral girdle and the bones around the pectoral region, and then we're coming down to the thigh region, of course, the femur. Then we come down to the leg region. We have the fibula and the tibia, and then we come down to the foot. Okay. Now the femur is the largest bone of the body, which I believe we've heard that prior till now, right? And of course, we have some. In case you've not seen some diagrams before, you'll be able to get some diagrammatic representation on that in this class. Okay, and then we have the tibia and the fibula. Now, mind you, we have two bones around that region, around the leg region. We have two bones there. Now, the tibia is located within the medial aspect, and then the fibula is located around the lateral aspect of the leg. Remember, during the introductory class on the upper limbs, you made mention of what medial and lateral means. So we should be able to appropriate that understanding to this as well. Just the way I talked about the ulna and the radius, the same thing applies here too. Okay, so then moving downwards, we have the bones of the bones of the foot rather. We have the tarsals, we have the metatarsals, and then we have the phalanges. We have the tarsals, we have the metatarsals, and we have the phalanges. So now moving on to the bones of the foot. We've talked about the bones of the hip. We've talked about the bones of the thigh. With the bone of the thigh, we've talked about the bones of the leg, and now we're talking about the bones of the foot. Okay, like I said earlier, we have the tarsals, we have the metatarsals, and the phalanges. Those are the bones. And of course, they have more bones actually. There are more bones on the lower, that's the leg. Sorry, we have more bones on the foot, right? More bones on the foot. And the bones are, like, generally, the bones are called metatarsals and all that. But then breaking it down, we have other tiny bones. We have the cuboid, we have the navicular bones, we have those tiny bones, just the way we talked about the bones of the carpal bones. I'll talk about the scaphoid, we have the trapezium, we have the lunate, we have the capitate and all that. Same thing applies down to the tarsal, the tarsal and metatarsal bones and all that. Okay. And then we'll also be looking at the arches of the foot. Right. Okay. Now we have bones. We have the bones of the foot, which we've been able to mention, but we also need to look at the arches of the foot. I remember when I was little, I used to look at my foot and then I tried to okay, why is there a space? Like, why are there some curves around my foot, right? Those curves, of course, are called arches. And we have the transverse arch. I wish I could demonstrate right now, but well, it's a good thing we have images here where you can actually watch and understand better the arches arches of the foot. So I'm just going to list them for the sake of this class. We have the transverse arch, we have the medial, and we have the lateral arch. So there are videos or there are images here that would actually help us to understand more the positions of these arches and what they really look like. Thank you.